A waitress smiled politely and said, "Hi sir, my mother has a ring just like yours." The billionaire froze. That heirloom was supposed to be one of a kind. What began as an innocent remark would unravel forbidden love, buried secrets, and a legacy that could shatter everything he thought he knew. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The restaurant glowed with golden light, chandeliers reflecting off polished marble floors, and glasses filled with rare vintages. The hum of conversation was refined, the kind of place where laughter never grew too loud, where every plate was a curated masterpiece. Waiters glided between tables in crisp uniforms, their steps precise, their smiles practiced. Sofia Morales had learned to keep her head down in such a world. At 23, with her long dark hair tied neatly back and her modest uniform freshly pressed, she blended easily into the rhythm of service. To her, the gleaming silver and the muted extravagance of the restaurant were a stage she stepped onto every evening, wearing professionalism like armor. But beneath the practiced motions, she carried something more. A quiet resilience shaped by long nights, her mother's sacrifices, and the relentless drive to keep going. Tonight, she balanced a tray with steady hands, her smile unwavering as she approached a private alcove, where velvet drapes muted the bustle of the main floor. The man seated at the head of the table was impossible to ignore. Alexander Drake. His presence commanded the room even in silence. With his sharp jawline, impeccably tailored suit, and air of authority, he was every inch the billionaire the tabloids described: cold, calculating, untouchable. Sofia didn't falter. She had served demanding guests before, people who viewed waitstaff as part of the decor. She set down glasses, offered wine choices, all with the same graceful calm, but as she leaned slightly to pour, her eyes caught something that made her breath hitch. The ring. It glinted under the chandelier light, resting on his hand as he reached for his glass. A thick gold band, engraved with a distinctive crest, a hawk clutching a laurel branch. Her heart lurched. For years, Sofia had seen that symbol on a ring her mother wore. A family heirloom, her mother had said, though she never spoke of where it came from. It had always seemed oddly out of place, an object too fine, too storied, to belong in their small apartment, where every dollar was stretched. Without thinking, Sofia smiled politely and said the words that would change everything. "Hi sir, my mother has a ring just like yours." The table went silent. Forks froze mid-air, glasses paused before lips. The hum of conversation from the dining room seemed to dull, as if the chandeliers themselves leaned closer to listen. Alexander Drake's eyes snapped to hers. For a heartbeat, the mask of indifference slipped, and something raw flickered across his face. Shocked, disbelief, something dangerously close to recognition. His fingers tightened around the glass. "Did you say?" His voice was low, controlled but edged with steel. Sofia blinked, suddenly aware of the weight of her words. Heat rushed to her cheeks. "I only meant the ring. My mother has one that looks the same. I didn't mean to." But Alexander wasn't listening to her apology. His gaze had dropped to the ring on his own hand. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was the Drake heirloom, passed down for generations, as much a part of his identity as the empire he ruled. There could be no duplicate. And yet, a waitress, this young woman with steady hands and unguarded eyes, had just claimed her mother owned a twin. The air thickened with tension. Around the table, his companions exchanged uneasy glances, their polite conversation forgotten. One man cleared his throat, murmuring, "Probably a coincidence?" But his words... Alexander's eyes returned to Sofia, sharp and unrelenting. He studied her face with unsettling intensity. The curve of her cheekbones, the depth of her dark eyes, the tilt of her chin. They stirred something deep in his memory, a resemblance he couldn't name but couldn't ignore. Sofia shifted uncomfortably under his scrutiny, her pulse racing. She hadn't meant to draw attention, hadn't meant to disturb the fragile line between guest and server. But the words had slipped, and now they hung between them like a storm cloud, charged and waiting to break. Alexander's voice, when it came, was softer but more dangerous. "What's your name?" She whispered, "Sofia Morales." The syllables echoed in his mind, striking against memories buried beneath years of boardroom battles and social facades. Morales, the name tugged at something, but he forced the thought aside. Instead, he nodded curtly, his face once again a mask of control. "You may continue," he said flatly, dismissing her as though nothing had happened. But it had happened, and though Sofia bowed her head, retreating into the safety of her duties, she felt the weight of his stare linger long after she left the alcove. At the table, his companions resumed their conversation with forced laughter, but Alexander barely heard them. He touched the ring with his thumb, his mind racing. One ring, one heirloom, one waitress with her mother's mysterious past, and one resemblance he couldn't shake. The remark had been innocent, but it had shaken him to his core. Conversation resumed around the private table, but only in shape, not in spirit. Cutlery chimed, glasses tipped, and practiced laughter drifted like perfume, yet Alexander heard it all as static. His attention kept circling back to the waitress who had smiled without guile and tossed a spark into dry tinder. Across the room, Sofia moved through the glow of chandeliers with steady grace, checking a wine level, folding a napkin's corner, whispering a courtesy to a guest. The ring on his hand felt suddenly heavy, as if the gold had remembered its story. He caught himself watching the tilt of her head, the thoughtful crease at her brow, the unguarded kindness in her eyes. Familiar. Impossible. The words scraped against reason, but refused to loosen its grip. He lifted a finger. The maitre d' appeared at once, all velvet discretion. "Send the waitress back, please." When Sofia returned to the alcove, she stood with hands lightly folded, shoulders squared. "Mr. Drake?" she asked, careful, respectful. Alexander kept his tone even. "About your comment. Your mother's ring. Humor me. Describe it." An instant of hesitation flickered, then she nodded. "Big gold band, a crest hook with a laurel branch. The edges are beveled, not sharp. There's an inscription inside, but it's worn. My mother says it's Latin." She swallowed. "It looks old, like it belongs to a story." He had schooled his face in boardrooms and funerals. Even so, a small muscle leapt at his jaw. Fortis Paradises, the motto etched inside his own signet, strength through our roots. He rotated his ring under the table with a thumb, forcing himself to breathe. "Your mother's name?" he asked, and the question felt like stepping onto thin ice. Sofia's gaze searched his, puzzled but honest. The syllables struck like a bell in a distant room. Alexander's mind slid back to a summer of long corridors and late light, to a young woman with night-dark hair, setting a vase straight in a hallway, to the hush that followed after she left the estate without a goodbye. Elena. He had been away too much then. New York, Zurich, negotiations stacked like stones. Yet he remembered his brother's guarded smile that season, a happiness tucked behind people's. "I appreciate the detail," he said, and the words sounded oddly formal, as if he were thanking a witness. "No trouble," Sofia replied, stepping back, a hint of apology in her posture. "I didn't mean to overstep." He inclined his head, dismissing her gently, and watched her vanish into the chandelier haze. In the cool hush of the corridor to the restrooms, he braced a palm against marble and studied the out-of-a-kind, the family always said. Commissioned in Paris generations ago, reforged once, never duplicated. The jeweler had sworn by it, yet rumors sometimes cling like burrs. Whispered nonsense about a second piece commissioned in secret, a gift not meant for ledgers. He had dismissed it then as myth. Myths tend to wake when named. He returned to the table and ended the evening early. When the bill arrived, he signed with quick, decisive strokes and added a tip that would pay a month of rent in a better neighborhood. As the guests gathered their coats, he murmured to the maitre d', "The waitress? Sofia Morales. Ensure she gets commended." In the shadow of the revolving door, he thumbed a discreet message to his assistant. "Pull staff ledgers from the Harborview Any Morales. Also, contact Devereaux and Hart, the old jewelers. Archives on Drake's signet work." The phone buzzed in acknowledgement. Outside, the night was a crisp sheet of glass. Alexander touched the ring again, as if it might answer. Sofia exhaled when the alcove emptied. "You okay?" whispered Lila from the service station, stacking dessert plates. "He looked like he wanted to read your birth certificates." Sofia half laughed, half winced. I made a stupid comment about a ring. My mother has one like it. He noticed. Lila's brows shot up. Like his? Sofia, that's not a knockoff you joke about. I wasn't joking, Sofia said softly, surprised at how certain she sounded. She finished aligning the tableware, then carried water to a couple by the window. Still, the weight of Alexander's stare tugged at her. There had been no cruelty in it, only an intensity that felt heavier than anger. It made her uneasy, and for reasons she couldn't name, a little seen. Closing shrank the grand room down to clinks and whispers. Sofia shrugged on her coat and stepped into air that smelled faintly of rain. On the bus, lights flicked past like beads on a string. She thumbed a text. Mama, a customer tonight had a ring like yours. Then she hovered and hit delete. Elena never enjoyed talking about the past. Questions slid off her wave over dark sidewalks. When she reached their walk-up, she paused by the framed photo on the narrow shelf. Elena, laughing, hair blown wild by seaside wind. One day, Sofia murmured, I'm going to ask, and I want you to tell me everything. Alexander's driver asked, Home, sir? He didn't answer right away. Drive, he said finally, and the car glided along the river while the city unspooled in silver and stone. Memory rose like tide. His brother, Julian, whistling some half-remembered tune in the East Corridor. A muffled argument with their father about rules and appearances. The swift hush that followed, a name spoken too sharply. Ayla, carrying a stack of linens, eyes bright, then gone the next week with a note that never surfaced. Back then, Alexandria had called it drama. Now the old scenes rearranged themselves, a picture resolving from noise. If Elena had worn a ring like this, who had placed it on her hand, and why had the family's history made no room for her? He watched the skyline rush the windshield like a ledger of debts finally itemized. The signet pressed a crescent into his palm. There are objects that choose their own moments to speak, he thought. Tonight the ring felt less like ornament and more like witness, heavy with a testimony that had waited years for a single, careless sentence to unlock it. He settled back against the leather, eyes open to the remark was a thread. Tomorrow he would pull it and see which part of his life unraveled, and which part of it, long hidden, might finally come into the light. The restaurant had long since emptied when Sofia untied her apron and folded it neatly over her arm. The hum of the refrigerators filled the silence, and the last of the staff slipped through the back exit with tired smiles and casual goodnights. She lingered a moment to wipe down one more table, her mind circling back to the way Alexander Drake had stared at her, the weight of his silence heavy as a stone in her chest. She turned toward the coat room when a voice cut through the hush. Miss Morales. She froze. He was still here. Alexander Drake leaned against the polished mahogany of the private alcove's entry, his tall frame carved against the glow of a single chandelier left burning. His jacket had been removed, his tie loosened, but his presence was as commanding as ever. Sofia steadied herself. Mr. Drake, we usually close the doors after hours. I can call... Stayed, he interrupted, his tone low, deliberate. Because we need to speak. Her pulse leapt. She tightened her grip on her apron, forcing herself to meet his eyes. About what? Ring. His gaze flicked briefly to her hands, then back to her face. And your mother? Her mouth went dry. She hadn't expected him to dwell on it. She had assumed her slip of the tongue would be forgotten, swallowed by the ocean of wealth and secrets that men like him lived in. But here he was, intent and unyielding. What about her? She asked carefully. Her name is Elena Morales, he said. Not a question, a statement. Sofia's breath caught. How do you know that? His jaw tightened. Because I remember her. She worked at my family's estate when I was younger. She was a maid. For a heartbeat, the world tilted. Sofia's throat burned. Her mother, Elena, who had raised her with quiet pride and endless sacrifice, had once belonged to his world? She had scrubbed the very halls Sofia had only ever glimpsed in glossy magazines? You're mistaken, Sofia managed. My mother hasn't spoken of that. Ever. But Alexander was already lost in the corridors of memory. She came one summer. I was away most of the time, business school, travels, but I remember my brother, Julian. He was different that year. He smiled more. He lingered in the gardens when he'd never cared for them before. His eyes narrowed slightly, and Elena was always near. The implication landed heavy between them, a forbidden romance whispered through years of silence. Sofia shook her head, her chest tightening. No, my mother never. Did she tell you who your father was? His voice sharpened, not unkind but relentless. Sofia flinched. It was the one question that had haunted her since childhood, the one her mother had always met with quiet evasions. Some stories are too heavy for children, Elena would say, or, you have me, that's enough. Footwear. Sofia whispered. She never did. Alexander's expression darkened, suspicion and something deeper flickering in his eyes. She never spoke of Julian? Sofia's breath hitched at the name. Julian. She had never heard it in her mother's stories, never once, but the way Alexander spoke it, the way it seemed to hang in the air, it struck a chord she didn't want to acknowledge. She repeated firmly, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. He studied her, as though every line of her face were a puzzle piece he was determined to fit into place. The longer he looked, the more unease coiled in her chest. Finally, he stepped back, his tone clipped but heavy. Then perhaps it's time you asked her, because that ring she wears is no coincidence. And neither are you. Sofia's fingers clenched around the fabric of her apron. The floor beneath her seemed unsteady, the walls pressing in. She wanted to demand answers, to demand that he leave her life untouched. Yet beneath her anger, a tremor of fear and something she would not name took root. Because deep down, she knew. Her mother's silences had always been too carefully woven to be innocent. That night, as she walked home through streets glistening with rain, Sofia replayed his words in her mind. Juliet, estate, maid. She had thought her mother's sacrifices were born from poverty alone. But what if there had been more? What if her mother had carried a secret, not out of shame, but out of love? At their small apartment, Elena sat at the kitchen table mending a torn sleeve, her fingers nimble, her expression calm. Sofia paused in the doorway, watching her mother, the woman who had always seemed both fragile and unbreakable. Mom, she began, her voice quiet but unsteady, did you ever work for the Drakes? Elena's needle froze. The silence stretched, louder than any thunder. Elena set the needle down with deliberate care, her hands trembling slightly as she folded the fabric. When she finally lifted her gaze, her eyes held a storm of memories. Who told you? She asked softly. Sofia's throat tightened. Alexander Drake. He remembered you. He said you worked at their estate. Elena inhaled slowly, the years catching up in her brow. Yes, she admitted. I did. It was many years ago. I was young, foolish, desperate for work. Their estate was hiring staff, and I needed money to keep my family afloat. Sofia moved closer, her heart pounding. Anne. Julian? The name felt foreign, yet it tasted of something familiar on her tongue. Elena's face paled. She turned her gaze away, her voice hushed. Julian Drake was kind, kinder than anyone in that house. He treated me as though I were more than invisible. Her voice cracked, memories spilling through her composure. We were young, we thought we had time. Sofia's breath caught. Was he? Elena's silence was answer enough. Tears pricked Sofia's eyes. Why didn't you tell me? Because love between worlds like theirs and ours never survive, Elena whispered. Because when Julian died suddenly, an accident they barely spoke of, I was left alone, and I knew if they found out about you, they would take you, or worse, turn you into a weapon for their pride. I couldn't let that happen. The room spun. Sofia pressed her palms to the worn wood of the table, her mother's words sinking deep. She was the daughter of a man she never knew, a man whose family had built empires on wealth and secrecy. Alexandra's suspicion rang louder now. Could she be blood? Her voice broke as she whispered, So it's true. I'm a Drake. Elena reached across the table, gripping her hand fiercely. You are Sofia Morales. You are mine. Don't let their name define you. But Sofia barely heard. Her heart was torn between loyalty to the woman who had raised her and the shadow of a father whose blood ran in her veins. Across the city, Alexander sat alone in his study, the Drake crest glinting from his ring under lamplight. He had demanded answers from Sofia, but now the questions twisted in him like knives. If Elena's daughter truly was Julian's child, then the girl who had spoken so innocently of her mother's ring wasn't just a waitress. She was family. And family, in the Drake world, was never just blood. It was legacy, it was power. It was everything. For the first time in years, Alexander felt the weight of his empire tremble. Not from rivals, not from markets, but from a single young woman with eyes too much like his brother. And he knew this was only the beginning. The invitation came in the form of a cream-colored envelope, the Drake crest stamped in gold at the corner. Her mother stared at it for a long time, her mother's silence heavy beside her. The letter was brief, formal, and written in Alexander's precise hand. "Please join me at the estate this Saturday afternoon. An opportunity awaits." Her mother had frowned immediately. "It's a trap," Elena muttered, clutching the envelope as if it burned. "That house devours people. I left it once, Sofia. Don't let it swallow you." But Sofia, torn between curiosity and a gnawing ache for truth, whispered back, "Maybe it's the only way to know who I am." When Saturday arrived, she wore her simplest dress, navy blue, ironed flat, and smoothed her hair into a neat braid. Elena came along reluctantly, her hands clasped tight in her lap, as the taxi wound through iron gates and up a sweeping drive. The Drake estate stood like a fortress draped in elegance, its gray stone walls rising from manicured lawns. Rows of trimmed hedges framed a fountain where water spilled with effortless grace. To Sofia, it looked less like a home and more like a museum of power. They were greeted at the door by staff in pressed uniforms. Their polite smiles didn't hide the flicker of judgment in their eyes as they scanned Sofia's plain dress and her mother's worn shoes. Inside, the corridors stretched wide and glittering, hung with chandeliers that spilled golden light over portraits of stern-faced men and elegantly dressed women. Sofia's steps slowed as her eyes caught one of the paintings, a man with dark hair and sharp eyes, Julian Drake. She didn't need anyone to tell her, she knew. The tilt of his jaw, the curve of his smile, she saw shadows of herself there. "You see?" Elena whispered sharply, pulling at her sleeve. "This is why I never brought you here. This place is heavy with ghosts." Before Sofia could reply, Alexandre appeared at the end of the hall. Tall, immaculate in a charcoal suit, he carried himself with the ease of someone who owned the ground he walked on. His eyes flickered over Elena briefly before resting on Sofia, sharp but unreadable. "Thank you for coming," he said. His tone was clipped, polite, but beneath it lay an edge she couldn't mistake. They followed him into a drawing room with high ceilings and a fire crackling quietly in the hearth. Space smelled of leather and old wood, of generations of wealth. A tray of tea had been set on a polished table, untouched. Alexander gestured for them to sit, but Elena remained standing, her chin raised in quiet defiance. Sofia lowered herself cautiously into a velvet armchair, feeling the weight of the room press in around her. "I didn't bring you here to intimidate you," Alexander said, folding his hands behind his back. "I brought you here because the questions we circle around cannot stay unanswered." His eyes cut to Sofia. "That ring your mother owns, the way you resemble someone I once knew. I need the truth, and so do you." Sofia swallowed hard. "And what do you plan to do with it? Put me under interrogation until I break?" His expression softened briefly, though his voice stayed firm. "I plan to uncover what connects us. There is one way." He let the words hang. "A DNA test." The fire popped sharply, and Elena's gasp cut through the room. "How dare you?" she hissed. "She is not a specimen for you to prod. She is my daughter, not a pawn in your family's endless games." Sofia's cheeks flushed hot with humiliation. She felt suddenly small, like a child dragged into the principal's office. Her hands clenched in her lap, nails digging crescents into her skin. "You think I came here to beg for a place at your table?" she snapped. I didn't ask for any of this." Her voice trembled, but her eyes blazed. "If you want proof of who I am, look at me. Look at her," she said, pointing toward Elena. "We've survived without your name, without your fortune. Don't sit there and act as though a test will decide my worth." For a moment, silence swallowed the room. The fire's crackle seemed deafening. Alexander studied her, his face unreadable. But something flickered there, an unease, a glimmer of respect. He had expected tears, compliance, perhaps even desperation. Instead, he found steel. At last, he said quietly, "You mistake me. I am not questioning your worth. I am questioning the history my family buried. If you are who I believe you may be, you deserve more than whispers and shadows." Sofia's chest rose and fell with sharp breaths, her heart pounding. She hated how his words stirred something inside her. Hope, fear, a dangerous longing to belong. Elena's hand closed over hers, grounding her. "We don't need this, Sofia," she murmured. "We have each other. That's enough." But Sofia couldn't look away from Alexander. His eyes, once so cold, now carried something else, not just suspicion, but a flicker of protectiveness, as though the truth he sought was not only for him, but for her. The conversation carried into dinner, though no one touched the food. A grand dining hall stretched around them, portraits looming from the walls, silver cutlery gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers, but the atmosphere was sharp as glass. Alexander leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. "Do you understand what it means if you are Julian's daughter?" Sofia bristled. "Do you?" His jaw tightened. "It means the Drakes failed you. It means my brother's legacy was silenced. And it means you are part of this family, whether you want it or not." Her pulse thudded in her ears. "You speak as if family is a prize. My mother raised me with dignity, with love. That is my family." Alexander's gaze softened almost imperceptibly. "And I do not dismiss that. But blood carries weight, Sofia. Weight that should not have been hidden from you." Elena's voice cut in, fierce. "Blood is not love, and love is the only legacy worth protecting." The clash of their voices ricocheted around the hall. Sofia pressed her palms to the table, her composure unraveling. "Stop, just stop." Her voice cracked, raw. "I didn't ask to be dragged into this. I don't want your pity or your empire. I only wanted to understand why a ring my mother wears matches yours. But instead, I feel like I'm standing trial." She pushed back from the table, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "If you think I'll let a test define me, you're wrong. I am not your experiment." Words echoed, and for a long moment no one spoke. Then Alexander rose, his movements slow, deliberate. "You're right," he said quietly. "You're not," he paused, his eyes holding hers, "but you are something I cannot ignore." The intensity of his voice made her breath hitch. Anger warred with something softer in her chest, an unsettling sense that, beneath his suspicion, lay a pull she couldn't deny. She turned sharply and strode from the dining hall, her footsteps ringing against marble floors. Elena followed quickly, her eyes flashing with protective fury. Alexander remained behind, his hand resting on the back of his chair, his mind churning. He had meant to corner her with evidence, to force clarity where there was none, but instead, he had been the one disarmed by her fire, her dignity, her refusal to be diminished. He stared at the family portraits looming above, their painted eyes cold and watchful. For the first time in years, Alexander felt the weight of their judgment. Yet he also felt something else stirring, a need not just to uncover the truth, but to shield the woman who had walked out of his hall with her head high. The test of truth had begun, but the answers would not be found in a lab. They were in her defiance, in her mother's silence, and in the way his brother's shadow seemed to flicker through her every gesture. And as he stood alone in the grand dining room, Alexander knew this was only the beginning. The whispers began as little ripples, an offhand comment at a gala, a raised eyebrow at the country club, a curious glance over champagne glasses. But within a week, they became waves crashing through the marble corridors of high society. "The billionaire has a secret maid's daughter," one gossip column headline, printed above a grainy photo of Sofia leaving the Drake estate with Elena at her side. Another tabloid followed swiftly. "Waitress or heiress? The girl behind the ring." The photographs were merciless. One captured Sofia walking home from work, her simple dress creased, exhaustion lining her face. Another zoomed in on the modest apartment building where she and her mother lived, its cracked paint and broken railing gleaming under the unforgiving flash of a camera. To strangers, these were proofs of scandal, not of survival. At the restaurant, Sofia felt the change immediately. Regular customers, once polite and indifferent, now watched her with a blend of curiosity and disdain. She overheard a woman at table 3 whisper, "That's her, the one they say is trying to claw her way into the Drake fortune." Her cheeks burned as she cleared plates, the weight of unseen eyes pressing into her skin. She forced herself to keep her chin lifted, her steps steady, but inside, humiliation coiled like a snake. She wanted to shout that she had asked for none of this, that her only mistake was a casual remark about a ring. One night, as she carried water to a group of businessmen, one of them leaned back with a smirk. "So, Miss Morales, do we call you Your Grace now, or should we just ask for a discount at the Drake estate?" Laughter followed, sharp as knives. Sofia's hand tightened on the tray, but she said nothing. To respond would be to feed them. Still, the laughter echoed long after she left the table. It wasn't just the restaurant. At the grocery store, she caught two mothers whispering near the produce aisle, one murmuring, "Gold digger," while the other nodded, pity written across her face. Even at the bus stop, she felt eyes linger too long, as if strangers were measuring her against the headline. Clayton tried to shield her. "Ignore them, Mihija," she urged, pressing Perfia's hands between her own. "They only know the pieces of a story told by liars." But Sofia could see the shadows in her mother's eyes, the pain of old wounds reopening, the fear of being dragged once again through the dirt of Drake gossip. One evening, Sofia returned to the restaurant to pick up an extra shift. In the locker room, she overheard two coworkers speaking near the sinks. Like her mother was the Drake brothers' mistress, one whispered. "Please," the other scoffed. "Women like that don't get love, they get used, and now the daughter thinks she's going to cash in." Sofia stepped into view, her voice shaking but fierce. "Say it to my face if you believe it." The two waitresses stiffened, guilt flashing briefly across their faces before one muttered, "We were only repeating what everyone else is saying." Her voice cracked like glass. "Then stop repeating it. You don't know my mother. You don't know me." She stormed out before they could reply, her chest tight, her eyes stinging.